In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And God said, "Let there be light." And God separated the waters. And God made the great light the sun, and the lesser light the moon. And God called the dry land earth, and he said, "Let the earth bring forth vegetation." And the earth brought forth vegetation with seed in them, and God said that it was good. Then, after a long expanse of time through ancient civilizations, God called Abraham to leave his home and journey to a distant place that would be named after one of his descendants, a land called Israel. Come with us as we pilgrimage with Dr. Noah Hutchins and celebrate Israel, this miracle land of Abraham.
Take me back, dear Lord, to the place where I first received you.
Hi, I'm Ken Klein, and I'm your host on this Holy Land Tour of Israel. And with me is Dr. Noah Hutchins, a man who's been to Israel over 35 times. He's an expert on the Middle East, and he's our special guide. If you've made the trip before with Dr. Hutchins, this video will certainly warm your hearts and renew your love for the Jewish people and the land of Israel. If you've never made this trip before, this presentation is for you.
Thank you, Ken, and we're standing here at Abraham's well at Tel Beersheba. And it was here at Beersheba that Abraham and Sarah lived. It was also here that Isaac and Ishmael was born, and we think this is a good starting point for this tour. So, Ken, why don't we get started by just giving our viewers an idea of how deep this well is.
Okay, I'm going to throw a rock down there and listen to how deep they had to dig the well. The well is deep, but metaphorically, it serves in a deeper significance as a testimony of the well Abraham himself was.
And my, what an important biblical site this is. And right here, where I'm standing, begins one of the most amazing stories recorded in the Bible or in history. Because it was here that Abraham and Sarah had a child named Isaac. And subsequently, Isaac married Rebekah, and they had twins, Esau and Jacob. And even in Rebekah's womb, the twins were fighting. And when they were born, Jacob was holding on to the heel of Esau because the firstborn got the birthright. But subsequently, we know that feud developed between Esau and Jacob over that birthright. And Jacob ended up with the birthright. And subsequently, there was a warring situation that arose between the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, and the Israelites, the descendants of Jacob. And it will not be settled until the Messiah comes, and he himself will finally bring an end, and both the descendants of Ishmael and the descendants of Isaac will be blessed. That's the real stuff.
From Beersheba, we travel southeast towards the wilderness of the Negev. Here we pick up the exact route the Hebrews took when they came through the desert on their 40 years journey. The exact trail is appropriately marked by the final resting place of David Ben-Gurion, Israel's modern-day Moses, who at the turn of the 19th century, like Moses of old, led a second exodus of the Israelites back into the Promised Land, but this time they came out from all the nations of the world. The dry and barren vastness of the Negev gives pause to consider with wonderment the impossibility of such a journey without the necessity for the miraculous provision of God towards His people, as He sustained them in their arduous trek across this wilderness. As we continue to track the pathway of the Hebrews southward, we catch up with them at a place called Timna Park. While Timna Park is well off the beaten path of most Holy Land tours, it is right on track with the Jews' march on their way to the Promised Land. Timna Park is far to the south of the most visited sites in Israel. It is 25 kilometers north of Eilat and situated on 60 square kilometers of valley surrounded by belts of cliffs, the highest of which reaches an altitude of 854 meters. The cliffs are these semicircles of sedimentary rock of land and sea origin. These are the majestic Pillars of Solomon. These remarkable natural structures were named after King Solomon because this was a place he set up his copper mines and smelting operation. Here he came to smelt copper for the building of his great ships for his navy, and they are the oldest remains of copper smelting in the world today. The mines date back from 1800 BC. But once you climb these majestic cliffs, you'll see the real story of Timna Park.
Not far from here, Moses camped in the Tabernacle with over 1 million people surrounding it. And it was in this valley probably that they stayed for quite some time. We just climbed up to the temple, the pillars I should say, of Solomon. And it's an amazing sight, nice and cool up here. So if you do get to come, this is a good place to come and get out of the heat.
At the present time, we are in front of a model of the Tabernacle, which is just north of Eilat in Timna Park, in front of Solomon's Pillars. And we know that Amos said the Tabernacle of David would be rebuilt. Whether that means the temple or a tabernacle model like this one is open to question. They're building of some kind of structure on the controversial temple site that will be recognized as a holy place for Israel must be very, very near.
Welcome to the Tabernacle. My name is Yuval Shaked, and I'm Israeli, and I'm giving tours here in the Tabernacle. This model is the only one at the moment in the world that is one-to-one. And what I mean is that the measurements that are in the book of Exodus are the measurements that are here. And it's the cubit from the elbow till the fingers. It's about 48 centimeters of a mature man. So all what you see, the fence around, the tent, and the tabernacle behind me is all made by the cubit measurement. In this model, you can see the altar of sacrifice, the basin, and inside the golden altar, the menorah, the showbread table, and in the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant.
It's time to leave Timna Park, this most remarkable place, and head north. We're traveling along Israel's eastern border next to the country of Jordan. We are headed towards the lowest point on earth, the Dead Sea. The waters of the Jordan River flow into the Dead Sea from the north, but they have no outlet. The waters are trapped here. Consequently, they continuously absorb vast mineral deposits, resulting in waters that are the saltiest on earth. Just to the east of this location is a very high plateau. This is where Herod the Great constructed one of his most amazing fortresses, Masada.
This famed fortress of Masada, which is about 2,000 feet above the main ground level in the area of the Dead Sea, was built by Herod the Great, and it was one of his many places of retreat. After the fall of Jerusalem to the Romans in 70 AD, many of the Israelis, called zealots, took Masada and withstood the Romans here in this 20-acre plot of barren, rocky ground for over 2 years. And only after 2 years of fighting and building a ramp were the Romans able to overcome them. But when the Romans finally bridged the fortress, they found that most of the 1,100 defenders had committed suicide. According to Josephus, there were only about a dozen survivors of this long period of siege. And until recently, the Israeli army would commission their officers here on top of Masada, taking the pledge that Masada never again.
1,000 corpses lay strewn on the bloody plateau. That was the astonishing sight greeting the Roman legions when they breached the wall that historic morning. The empty victory staring them down that day forecast like a shadow of portending doom the inevitable destruction of their heralded and mighty empire, and would become a prophetic metaphor trumpeted down through the corridors of time. As we continue north, not a far distance from Masada, we come to a delightful, secluded, and tranquil place. It is the location which David selected as his hideout when he was running from King Saul. It is in Gedi, and it's not hard to see why the future king of Israel selected this place. It was the perfect spot. There's plenty of fruits in the wild date trees and sparkling clear and flowing water, and most important of all, there was abundance of wild game. Not far from En-Gedi, only a few miles, is one of the most important archaeological locations ever discovered in all of human history.
Located in back of me, over my shoulder, is the Dead Sea Scrolls Museum located near the Knesset in Jerusalem. In 1947, an Arab shepherd boy was hunting his sheep, and he threw a rock into a cave at Qumran, located at the north end of the Dead Sea, and he heard a clink. So he went in to see what caused the clink, and he found a huge jar that contained some ancient scrolls. And this was just one of several jars that contained these scrolls. And these scrolls were written by the Essenes who lived in that area between 200 BC and 70 AD until the Romans chased them out and took over Jerusalem, destroyed the temple. But these scrolls contain many writings that are relevant to the history of Israel and the history of the times. But the most important part of the Dead Sea Scrolls are the scriptures, especially the book of Isaiah, which proves that the Bible we have today is exactly as it was written by Isaiah, something like 2,500 years ago or more. So it gives us new faith that our Bible is indeed the recorded Word of God.
One wonders, there's other caves here, if there's other stuff that the Essenes stashed up on top of the hills. I'd like to come back here sometime and go searching through there and see if we can find another book like Isaiah that they found right down here below, which you saw before. It's quite a place. It's amazing. When you travel the Promised Land, even the animals rejoice and seem to be having the time of their lives.
On our tour through Israel, an important biblical site is the city of Jericho. Jericho is considered to be the oldest city in Israel, if not the oldest city in the world. To the west of Jericho is the traditional Mount of Temptation, where Jesus fasted 40 days to be tempted by Satan. This site can be visited by tourists via a cable car that runs from Jericho to the summit. Jericho was defended by a high wall when Joshua led the children of Israel across the Jordan River about a mile to the east of the city. God instructed the Israelites to take the Ark of the Covenant and march around the city once a day for 6 days, and then on the 7th day to march around the city 7 times. When the priests then blew the trumpets and the people shouted, the walls fell down. Remains of the ancient walls of Jericho can be viewed in the excavations. We are at the site of the ancient city of Bethshan. Bethshan is approximately 20 miles south of the Sea of Galilee on the Jordan River Road to Jericho. Before the reign of King David, the city was alternately occupied by the Canaanites and Philistines, and it was on the walls of Bethshan that the Philistines hung the bodies and armaments of King Saul and his sons. In Roman times, the city was enlarged, and other than Damascus was the largest city in the Decapolis Alliance. Unwisely, the city was built over the Syrian-African Rift, the largest earthquake fault in the world. In 749 AD, a massive earthquake leveled Bethshan, killing most of the inhabitants. Israel is presently engaged in extensive restoration work here.
There are often times when traveling the highways and byways of Israel that one must slow down just to keep up with the progress of these industrious people. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." Thus God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. This is the Sea of Galilee, the very source of life for the state of Israel. Without this body of life-giving waters, there could be no state of Israel. The Jews' great ingenuity for industry and invention has harnessed these waters through the creation of the world's greatest irrigation technologies. They have literally turned the state of Israel into a well-watered garden. But Israel's ongoing celebration of the waters of Galilee is not just isolated to the miracle of irrigation alone. Thousands of people come to Tiberias, the city on the western shores, for dancing, vacations, weddings, water sports, boating, and fishing. And neither is Tiberias a retreat just for the natives. From all over the globe come thousands to remember, to contemplate, perhaps the greatest miracle of all, when Jesus walked above the waters. Of course, Peter momentarily shared in the miracle when he stepped out of the boat onto the sea, but the boat he stepped out of was certainly not like one of these. Several years ago, a small fishing boat was discovered deep in the mud on the shores of Galilee. It was found to be dated to the very time of Christ. Because of the great discovery, a museum was constructed just to the north of Tiberias, where the ancient boat was placed. We took time to visit. Could this have been the very boat Peter stepped out of? Not likely. But it does transport you back in time and gives you a better idea of the vessels that were used by the fishermen to navigate these waters when Jesus and Peter walked above the waters on the Sea of Galilee.
This beautiful site is the place where traditionally Jesus preached his first sermon. It was known as the Sermon on the Mount, or the Sermon of the Beatitudes. And let us consider what Jesus shared with us in his first sermon, because only he was able to completely fulfill it. We read, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," and we knew that Jesus became poor for our sakes. He had no place to lay his head. and blessed are they which mourn. Jesus himself mourned with Mary and Martha over the death of Lazarus. Blessed are the meek. Jesus, although he was the King of glory, humbled himself even to the death of the cross. Blessed are they which hunger after righteousness. Jesus did not need to fulfill any righteousness because he is our righteousness. Blessed are they which shall show mercy. Mercy and truth came by Jesus Christ. Blessed are the pure in heart. Jesus, who knew no sin, became sin for us. Blessed are the peacemakers. Jesus was the greatest peacemaker the world has ever known because he brought peace between the sinner and God through his sacrifice on the cross. And blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake. No one was persecuted like Jesus. If we are to fulfill the Beatitudes, what Jesus taught here, we are to put on the mind of Christ and follow in his footsteps. And only then can we be partakers in this great message that he shared with us on this spot.
A very short distance from the beautiful setting of the Mount of Beatitudes are the remains of the ancient town of Capernaum, the town of Jesus. Here we find the location of the Jewish synagogue where Jesus came to teach. If these walls could talk, they would resonate with the sounds and words of Christ, where many stood to hear the Son of God. One of his many visits here was recorded in Scripture by the Apostle Luke and can be found in his Gospel in Luke chapter 4. Just outside the synagogue ruins are many artifacts of those days that help us picture and understand what life and culture was like and how people lived during those memorable days when Jesus walked on the earth. Just immediately south of the synagogue, only a stone's throw, is what is believed to be the remains of the house where Peter and his family lived.
As a result of the unbelief of the people of Capernaum, Bethesda, and Chorazin, Jesus pronounced a woe on these three cities. And although all the other cities would be resettled after their old estates, Jesus indicated that these three cities would never be inhabited again, and in the day of judgment, even Sodom would share better than these three cities. And today, there is a little city of Sodom down at the southern end of the Dead Sea, where the chemical works are, and you can send a postcard to the postmaster of Sodom, and he will get it. So this is another remarkable fulfillment of messianic signs. We are at the site of one of the most unusual cities of history, Gamla. Gamla is located in the foothills of the Golan Heights, approximately 3 miles west of the Sea of Galilee. It was built on a ledge extending outward from a steep canyon wall by refugees returning from Babylonian captivity after 530 BC. They settled on this precipice, called the Camel Hump, because the city would be easy to defend. Gamla became the eastern anchor of the defense line of Josephus, governor of Galilee, in the rebellion against Rome, which began in 66 AD. When Vespasian led a Roman legion against Gamla, he suffered a humiliating defeat. However, he returned with reinforcements, and Gamla fell. 5,000 Jewish inhabitants of Gamla plunged to their deaths from the Camel Hump to the canyon floor below rather than surrender to the Romans. Today, the entire Gamla area is a historic park and game reserve.
Well, Gamla Nature Reserve is one of the most beautiful places in Israel. You can see it's the biggest colony of birds of prey in Israel. It's the biggest colony not only by the number of individuals but also by the numbers of different species breeding and roosting in the cliffs of Gamla Canyon. The dominant raptor here is the griffon vultures. There's 120 individuals living here in these cliffs, but you can find also the Egyptian vultures, the long-legged buzzard, the Bonelli eagle, the short-toed eagle, the kestrel, the eagle owl, and few other species that are migrating through this area.
This behind me is the River of Dan, one of the main headwaters of the Jordan River, which flows into the Sea of Galilee. This is also the territory of Dan and the city of Dan, where Jeroboam set up the golden calf.
The snow falls on Mount Hermon, then it melts when the sun comes up in the spring and the summer. The water goes into the mountain, and then it comes down here and bursts forth out of one of these thousands of little springs, and then flows into the river, which you just saw, that makes up one of the main sources of water for Israel. You wouldn't think you'd find a jungle in Israel, but in these northern parts, just like being in the Amazon. Behind me is what remains of the ancient city of Dan. Formerly, the Danites lived between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv to the south, some 150 miles or so, but they were raided by the Philistines from Gaza continuously. And not only that, there wasn't any water there. Now you can see from the shots that you've already seen that there's a lot of water up here. It's fertile. There's a lot of orchards up here, and so they moved north. But when they did, they exposed themselves to the teachings of Jeroboam and his idolatrous worship. And as a result of that, they departed from the God of Israel, and they morally decayed. And finally, God sent the Assyrians in to destroy them almost 150 years before the rest of the 10 tribes fell. And this was their residence for quite some time.
After the division of the kingdom at the death of Solomon, Rehoboam reigned over the southern kingdom and Jeroboam reigned over the northern kingdom. And Jeroboam reasoned, now, if these people of the 10 tribes go back up to Jerusalem to worship at the temple at the feast days, and especially at the Passover, well, they're going to get attached back to the temple and Jerusalem, and they'll go back to Rehoboam, and they'll overthrow me, and I'll have a big problem. So he reasoned that, now if I set up a golden calf here in Dan and one at Bethel, I can tell the people, why go back up to Jerusalem? It's a long road up there, and after all, it's so convenient for you to come to Dan and to Bethel, and after all, we have these beautiful gods that our forefathers worshipped in Egypt. So why go back up there? And here was the high place where the calf was set up, the golden calf, and down below was the altar. And Jeroboam became known as the man who made Israel to sin. Another beautiful part of Israel, near Dan, where Peter declared that Jesus was the Son of the living God, and Jesus responded, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." A large underground clear river flows from under the rock cliff and becomes another tributary of the Jordan that flows into the Sea of Galilee. This beautiful stream is full of trout.
After repeated invasions by Syria, its hostile neighbor to the north, Israel discovered how vital the area was for its own security and for maintaining its water sources. The reality of these findings led to the decision that the Golan Heights should become an indispensable part of Israel. Since that annexation, many agricultural communities were established on the Golan Heights, transforming the area into a vital and indispensable part of the state of Israel.
We're here in the foothills of the Golan Heights, and you cannot imagine what Israel has done to this land, which was once nothing but rocks and nothing growing here at all. This is the cornfield, and we're here the latter part of August. And this is not Oklahoma or Iowa. This is in Israel. Here it is, the latter part of August. Nobody plants corn or grows corn in August, except they do here in Israel. And look at this corn, 2 and 3 ears on every stalk. It's the most amazing thing. And again, we remember what the Bible says, that God would make this land blossom as a rose, and Israel would fill the whole world with fruit.
This is one of many sophisticated wineries on the Golan Heights that uses the highest technologies available today for the production of a vast array and assortment of cuisine sweet wines. In this place, there is wine for everyone, from the youngest to the oldest, and such an assortment that one scarcely can decide what to purchase. That is why you're invited to try before you buy.
Ezekiel prophesied that when Israel was gathered back in the land out of all countries in the last days, that the cities would be renamed after their old estate. Of course, when Israel was absent from the land, foreign conquerors were here. The Romans, the Turks, and other conquerors lived here, and each new conqueror would rename the cities. Well, as we travel through Israel today, Jerusalem, it's renamed Jerusalem. Nazareth is Nazareth. Bethlehem is Bethlehem. Beersheba is Beersheba. And even this little village behind me where Jesus raised the widow's son, Nain, has been named again Nain. So this particular messianic prophecy has come to pass even in our day. As we continue our travels through the Holy Land, our next site, which is of significance, historical, and prophetic importance, is Megiddo. Megiddo was a defense position guarding the Jezreel Valley. King Solomon kept a cavalry regiment here. the remains of the stables and feeding troughs are still in evidence. Due to this site being an ideal military position to defend against invading armies, it is noted in history that more soldiers have died on this spot than any other battleground in the world. According to Revelation 16, the armies that will fight in the last great war of this age, the Battle of Armageddon, will be gathered here in the valley before Megiddo. The battle will rage for 200 miles to the south, past Jerusalem, down to Basra, just north of Petra. Napoleon stood on the hills of Megiddo and noted that all of the armies of the world could marshal on the plains that lay before it. To supply defenders with water, a deep tunnel was dug and channeled to a hidden spring on the outside wall.
No, when I was a little kid at the Jewish temple before I became a Christian, they used to have drives where they would raise money, encourage us to bring money, so that we could plant trees in Israel. And here we are standing in one of those forests that we probably spent money to plant. And I'm amazed. You have every kind of variety of tree in here, and it's remarkable what you see. Some of these trees are 60 feet high.
And you know, Ken, our ministry at Southwest Radio Church, we have planted 2 forests here in Israel. Now, why were drives made, like the one you mentioned in your synagogue, to plant trees here? Because during the diaspora, this entire country of Israel was denuded of trees by the various conquerors who came to this land and ruled over it for almost 2,000 years. But we read in Isaiah 41 that when the Jews returned to the land, that God would plant here the myrtle tree, the pine tree, the box tree, and all the trees mentioned that you see here. Some trees have never grown here before. And Isaiah went on to say, when the nations of the world see trees in this number and variety growing on the mountains and valleys of Israel, they are to know that he is doing this in preparation to fulfill his covenant, his messianic promises to Israel. It was in the days of Elijah the prophet that King Ahab, who was a very wicked and evil man, reigned over the northern kingdom of Israel. And his wife Jezebel was also a very evil woman who led the 10 northern tribes into idolatrous worship. And in those days also there was a drought over Israel. And Elijah was being blamed for this drought because he was trying to bring revival to Israel and he opposed wicked Jezebel. So he challenged the prophets of Baal to a duel here on Mount Carmel. And the duel consisted of, they were to offer a sacrifice up here, and he would also offer a sacrifice and see if their gods would consume their sacrifice, or his God of Israel would consume his own sacrifice. And so the prophets of Baal failed in their effort to get the Baal to send a fire down and consume their sacrifice. And then it was his turn, and he poured water upon his sacrifice a great amount of water brought up from the brook Kishon, which is below here at the bottom of Mount Carmel. And God sent a fire upon his altar and consumed his sacrifice. And then Elijah turned to the people of Israel who had gathered here to see who would win. And he says, if Ahab's God be God, or Baal, serve him. But if Jehovah God, the God of Israel, is really God, then serve him, but make up your mind, do one or the other, don't try to serve both of them. And so the people said, Elijah's God is God. So they took the prophets of Baal down below here to the brook Kishon, and there they killed them all. And Elijah looked over toward the ocean, and he saw a small cloud, and he told Ahab, said, get on back to Jezreel, a rain is coming. And so the crowd grew, and Elijah ran before the horses all the way to Jezreel, and a great rain came, and the drought ended. And so, at least for a time, the nation of the northern kingdom worshiped God as the true God. And this place here is where this miracle occurred, which is certainly one of the most important miracles we read about in the Old Testament. Caesarea was built by Herod the Great for the Romans because Herod the Great was an Edomite and had no real authority in Israel except the power of Rome behind him. And it was here that Pilate went up to Jerusalem. Pilate, the proconsul, went up to Jerusalem at the time of the Passover when Jesus was crucified. And Jesus appeared before Pilate. Now there are those who try to refute the Bible as the Word of God and are always trying to find errors in the Bible, say that there was never such a man as Pilate, therefore there was probably never such a person as Jesus Christ. However, just a few years ago here at Caesarea, there was uncovered a piece of the cornerstone of one of the buildings here with the name of Pilate on it, proving without doubt that there was a proconsul here from Rome by the name of Pilate. But Caesarea is probably known best for the fact that it was here that Paul was imprisoned for 2 years. He had returned to Jerusalem in spite of warnings from the Holy Spirit, and he was arrested at the temple, and he was subsequently taken into custody by the Romans and brought here mainly for his own protection. After 2 years, he despaired of ever being given a trial or being released. Therefore, he appealed to Caesar because he was a Roman citizen. Any Roman citizen could appeal to Caesar if they felt they were unjustly accused or arrested for a crime they did not commit. And it was here he went to Rome, and Rome he spent some time before he was released, arrested again, and then beheaded on the Appian Way. In continuing our visit to the Holy Land, we are now at Jaffa, and the whale in the background reminds us of an important event that happened here. We know that Jonah was instructed to go to Nineveh, a very wicked and evil city, with a warning from God that in 40 days Nineveh would be destroyed. But he didn't want to go to Nineveh. He didn't want to go to those vicious heathen. So he came to Jaffa, to flee from God. He was going to get away from the mission that God had given him to do. And of course, we know the story that he was thrown over ship and a whale swallowed him, and he had to take the message of Israel, the mission that God had given Israel, to be a witness to the heathen, had to go to Nineveh anyway, and he took the message, and of course God repented, and Nineveh was spared the judgment. We also remember that God sent the Apostle Peter here to Jaffa with a message for the Gentiles in a very similar manner that he sent Jonah to Nineveh from here. He sent Peter here because Israel had said, we will not have this man rule over us, and there was no one to take the gospel to the Gentiles. So Peter came down here to Jaffa, dwelled in the house of Simon the tanner, and here he received a mission. And as a result of that mission and vision, he went to the house of Cornelius. Cornelius and his household were saved, and he opened the door for the gospel then to go to the Gentiles, to the whole world during this dispensation. We are standing on a high point in Jaffa overlooking the coastline of Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is mentioned in the Old Testament, but it's spelled Tel Aviv instead of Tel Aviv. But the Jewish word, whether it's Tel Aviv or Tel Aviv, means the return or a new beginning. And this is why Tel Aviv was so named, because after the final dispersion of Israel in 70 AD into all nations, as Moses and all the prophets prophesied they would be, they began to return as Moses and all the other prophets also said that they would return. And by the way, we're at the Carmel market here in Tel Aviv. It's a huge market, probably close to 200 acres in this market, filled with fruit of every kind, and huge fruit. I have in my hand here an avocado. Not long ago, avocados didn't grow in Israel. So they went to the United States and brought back some avocado cuttings and seeds, and they developed avocados here that surpass anything we have. This is an avocado almost as big as a grapefruit. And then they had to convince the Europeans that they needed to eat avocados, which they did. And now they ship these avocados to Europe and all over the world because they're so superior to the avocados that we have in the United States. And this is just another example of the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy that when Israel returned to the land, it would no longer be barren and desolate, but it would again be bountiful and fill the whole world with fruit. As we look at Tel Aviv, this is a reminder that God is fulfilling his promises to Israel, and the Messiah is soon to return.
The sunsets on the coast of Israel speak for themselves. You'd think you were on the French or Italian Riviera, but this is Israel. What a day! But every day is what a day in Israel. We made it to the hotel just as the sun was setting. This could easily be termed the Riviera of Israel. The hotel is first class, and if you are inclined to take a stroll towards town, there is the boardwalk that leads right to the hotspots in Tel Aviv. But after a long day of travel and viewing all the sights and places, it's time for bed. What a surprise in the morning! The most sumptuous breakfast you'll ever eat. If you like to eat, then there's nothing like this. Whether in the mountains, the seashore, or in the cities, this is breakfast in Israel. The Jewish people like to eat, and they like you to eat, because you are partaking in their miracle. And boy, do you eat. All the food in Israel is homegrown. Nothing here is imported. Fresh food. Everything you eat, everything is made here in Israel. What a spread. Whatever you want, just fill up.
You know, it's very interesting that here in Israel, you cannot travel along any major road, any major highway, even 1 mile without running across some place or some site or some memorial or some location that does not have a contemporary prophetic relationship. But the tanks that you see around me are tanks that have been used in the wars of Israel, from the Sherman tank up to Israel's latest tank, the Chariot. And also in this collection of tanks, as a memorial to the brave men who defended Israel in these past wars, are some tanks captured from the Egyptians, the Syrians, the Iraqis, or other Arab nations that have come against Israel in these last days. All this was prophesied exactly over 2,500 years before it happened. For example, Zechariah predicted that when Israel would return to the land just before the Messiah came, that the armies of Israel would destroy vast armies of the enemy on the right and on the left. And this is exactly what has happened. On the right and on the left, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and on the other side there is Egypt. So the world military strategists are amazed that although outnumbered at times 30 to 1, Israel has won amazing wars. You know, when I was younger, I didn't have trouble climbing steps. But, you know, there's something happened here that indicates that one of these days we're going to be able to climb steps without huffing and puffing. Because it was here that Jesus Christ appeared to two members of this village, the village of Emmaus, and related to them the story of his death, burial, and resurrection. And of course, this reminds us of our own resurrection that will occur at his second coming, when we will be raised in a new body, a body that will never decay away, an everlasting body, and our hearts burn within us, even as the villagers did when they heard the story of the glorious resurrection of Jesus Christ. As we read in the Gospel of Luke, it was in the days of Caesar Augustus that the Caesar issued a decree that all the world should be taxed. And Mary and Joseph lived in the town of Nazareth, but Joseph's birthplace was here at Bethlehem. Therefore, he had to return to Bethlehem to register for taxation. By the time they got to Bethlehem, Mary had already entered into labor, and when they went to the only inn in this area, it was already full because people from all over the region had come to be taxed and to register for taxation. And it was here in Bethlehem that she gave birth to Jesus, which was, according to the prophecy of Micah, that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. However, there was no room at the inn, and Jesus was born in a manger. Now, in back of us here is the Church of Nativity. It is a church ruled jointly or taken care of jointly by the Greek Orthodox and the Roman Catholic Church. And according to tradition, perhaps with some credibility, Jesus was born in a grotto underneath that church. But actually, where he was born there or not is questionable to some extent. But if he wasn't born there under that church, he was probably born someplace here in Bethlehem, at least within a half a mile of the church. But it doesn't make any difference where he was born, it's why he was born. That is the question that is utmost important. Because he was born, he came into the world to save sinners, and as the Apostle Paul said, of whom I am chief. Therefore, we come here to Bethlehem to honor the birthplace of Jesus, and no tour to Israel would be complete without at least a stop here at Manger Square and at the church. In the travels of Israel, we are now in Bethany, which is on the eastern side of the Mount of Olives. And it was here in Bethany that Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, three friends of Jesus, lived. And when he was in the Jerusalem area, he would stay at the home of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And on one occasion, we read in the 11th chapter of John that while he was away, that Lazarus died. And he delayed his return, even though he had evidently received word of his death. And when he arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had been dead over 3 days and was already in the process of decay. The Jews believed that if a man had been dead 4 days, then the soul had left the body. That's why he was not entombed until the 3rd day. And so he was already stinking, so Mary and Martha thought that all hope of Jesus saving him was gone. Yet Jesus demonstrated that he was the author of life, and he appeared at what was said to be this tomb and commanded that Lazarus come forth, and he came forth. And it was at that occasion said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Though any man believeth in me, he shall never die. And after that, in the last week of Jesus' life, he stayed here at the home of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And he would go up a road over the Mount of Olives and go into Jerusalem. And it was on one of those last few days of his life that he delivered what is known as the famous Olivet Discourse, in which he prophesied what would happen to Israel and then about things that would come at the end of the world. First, God had to bring the Jews from the east. And we think of all the political changes that had to occur to bring the Jews out of the countries of the Middle East. How many governments had to be overthrown and how the persecution had to arise. Today in the Middle Eastern countries you find very little Jews. And then we think of World War I, and then World War II, and the over 6 million Jews that were killed by the Nazi regime of Germany. Who would have thought that such a thing could have been possible? And we read again that with a mighty arm, and that God had to do this. It took mighty changes to bring these Jews back into the land. And then we think of Russia. It looked like the Jews from Russia were not going to come back. And then God had to bring about the decline or the decease or the breakup of the Soviet Union in order to get the Jews back into the land. As we come here, I look at what is happening here at this Shabbat and the gathering of the Orthodox Jews to observe the beginning of the Sabbath. And I go back, way back to the beginning of the century about what God had to do to bring this to pass, to reestablish the nation of Israel and bring the Jews back. We read in verse 33, "As I live, saith the Lord God, surely with a mighty arm and stretched out arm and with fury poured out will I rule over you. And I will bring you out from the people and will gather you out of the countries wherein you are scattered, with a mighty hand and with a stretched out arm and with fury poured out. And I will bring you into this wilderness." It is with a heavy heart that we think that what must come to pass yet before the Messiah comes. And these dear people, and God's covenant people, find peace and safety and security in this land.
To the place where I first received you.
How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. If I do not remember you, let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy. Psalms 137, 4-6.
Jerusalem today is already a divided city. Jews, Muslims, and Christians are Catholics. But Revelation 19 informs us that in the future their city will be more physically and politically divided. That division is mentioned again in Revelation 16 and 19. And we see movements even today to bring this about. There is the Palestinians who want to break off East Jerusalem. And this is the Jerusalem that is recognized by God. This is where the temple site is. And then we have the Jews who are resisting the breakup. And then we have the Catholic Church under the auspices of the Pope, who claims to be God's vicar on earth, and he wants to make this an internationally divided city. So according to John, as being revealed to him by Jesus Christ, this city will be a literally divided city. So what is happening here even today in the division or the squabble over the division of Jerusalem has great prophetic significance and one of the important messianic signs that we see today in this land. One of the highlights of any visit to Israel is the Temple Mount, which involves the top 45 acres of Mount Moriah. It was here that Abraham brought his son to sacrifice to God until God stopped him and provided an animal sacrifice. King David later bought this area, which had been used as a threshing floor, as a location for the Lord's house. The first Jewish temple was completed by Solomon in about 950 BC. This area became a garbage dump during the rest of the Roman occupation of Israel. In 620 AD, Omar, a Muslim general in Muhammad's army, conquered Jerusalem, cleared the Temple Mount of garbage and rubbish, and erected a Muslim shrine over the large rock that some think is where Abraham offered up Ishmael. Later, El Ashkenaz was erected, and the Temple Mount, though not mentioned in the Quran, became the third most holy site to Muslims. Some archaeologists and Orthodox Jewish authorities believe the huge rock under the Dome of the Rock was where the Holy of Holies was in the temple. Others think the rock is where the burnt offering altar was located. And a few think the smaller Dome of the Spirits about a block away is where the Ark in the Holy of Holies sat, making the temple in that area. Most religious Jews pray for the reconstruction of the temple on Mount Moriah, and organizations like the Temple Mount Faithful and Temple Institute are making furniture and preparing Cohens and Levites for temple service. There will be a Jewish temple again here on Mount Moriah, but many events, like the removal of the two Muslim buildings, will have to occur first. The tribulation period will be concluded with the return of Jesus Christ, and then he will build his own temple. Standing here at the doorstep of the Church of St. Anne's. In my opinion, it's one of the most beautiful churches in the world and the most perfect church as far as the internal acoustics and sound systems are concerned without any electronic equipment. It's amazing that the Crusaders almost 1,000 years ago built such an edifice like this. They were marble builders, and if there's one thing they did good in this land was to build churches and buildings that even last to this day. We read in the 5th chapter of John about a very important incident that happened here during the ministry of Jesus. was at the pool of Bethesda, where we are at the present time. And we read that it was near a sheep market, which is just to the right here from me. And we look at this place, the pool of Bethesda, and we read that a lame man waited here by the pool in order to get down into the pool when it was bubbling. Evidently that there was an artesian effect in this pool at the time of Jesus. There's very little water now due to earthquakes that evidently severed the water vein. But in any event, this lame man wanted to get down in the pool because it was a tradition that if he could get down the pool while it was bubbling, he would be healed. But he told Jesus that he could not get down to the pool because while it was bubbling, because it took too long to get down through 5 terraces. And looking at this site, we can understand why it took him so long to get down. And of course, Jesus, in effect, told him he didn't need that kind of a tradition or that kind of healing, that he could heal him. And he told him to take up his pallet and walk, which he did. And he went and testified of the one who had healed him here at this particular site, the pool of Bethesda. The Jewish quarter of Old Jerusalem, inside the wall, is one of the most interesting sections of the city. Here you will find the area where many Orthodox Jews live. Quaint Jewish shops and restaurants maintain the traditional character and qualities of Jewish life today. It is here that organizations like the Temple Institute build the vessels and furnishings for a new Jewish temple and train Cohens and Levites for the resumption of sacrificial temple worship, looking forward, of course, to the coming of the Messiah. The traditional route that Jesus took, bearing his cross, aided by Simon from Cyrene. While Protestants and Catholics may disagree on the exact route that Jesus was forced to take that led from Antonio's Tower to Golgotha, all find inspiration in these narrow, crowded streets lined with Palestinian shops that are there to take advantage of the business opportunities provided by millions of Christian pilgrims and tourists coming yearly to visit the place where Jesus walked, ministered, died, and rose from the grave.
What we're looking at here is what is called a lithostratos. It's actually the floor of the outside portion of the Antonia of Herod, which was his fortress, the Antonia was. This is where they brought the Lord. And this is where they beat him, spit in his face, and they put the crown of thorns on his head. It's now become a church and is called the Church of the Ecce Homo, which means, behold the man. Of course, that's what Pontius Pilate said to the people. When he presented him to the Jews, he said, behold the man. And so this is the place where that all occurred.
We're here at the traditional site of the tomb of David, which is just to our right. Saul was the first king of Israel, but David established the first truly theocratic kingdom of Israel. Therefore, the Messiah, according to the prophet, must come from the lineage of David. Of course, we know, according to the prophecy of Isaiah, which really happened, the Babylonians made eunuchs of all the princes in the lineage of David to prevent the birth of Messiah. But God worked it out. He had the Messiah come through the Virgin Mary, who was truly in the lineage of David, but the Messiah, therefore, had to be born of the seed of woman because Joseph, her husband, was only an in-law. And so Jews all over the world, Christians and even Muslims come here to this site to pay homage to the memory of David. The Muslim look for the coming of the Mahdi. Christians look for the return of Jesus Christ, and the Jews look for the coming of their Messiah, all in the lineage of King David. We're here in the upper room. This is the room where Jesus and the apostles observed the Last Supper. And 50 days later, on the day of Pentecost, 120 Jewish disciples here and received the incoming of the Holy Spirit and went out and witnessed to Jews from all over the world, or the known world at that time, in their own language. The room that you see here, of course, is not the original upper room. That room was evidently destroyed in the Roman siege of 70 A.D. The room you see here, we know by construction, was built by the Crusaders in about 1150 A.D. over the original site.
One of the most sacred places in Israel is Golgotha, the place of the skull. We read in John chapter 19, verses 17 and 18, "And he, bearing his cross, went forth into a place called the place of a skull, which is called in the Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified him." We believe this is where Jesus was crucified because the face of the cliff is the shape of a skull. And according to Hebrews chapter 13, verse 12, he was crucified outside the city gate. And Golgotha is located near the Damascus gate, just outside the wall. And it is also on a road that went north to Damascus, a well-traveled highway ideal for a Roman crucifixion. It is also within a few feet of a garden where there was the tomb of a rich man, and this corresponds to the biblical description. We read in the Gospel of John, chapter 19, verses 41 and 42, "Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new sepulchre, wherein was never man yet laid. There laid they Jesus because of the Jews' preparation day, for the sepulchre was nigh at hand." We read in the scriptures that a large rolling stone covered the entrance to the tomb. This tomb in this garden had such a stone. Evidence indicate that this is indeed the tomb where the body of Jesus laid until the third day, when he arose as the first fruits of resurrection glory.
We are now in the Kidron Valley, and behind us is the Golden Gate, also called the Eastern Gate. The Eastern Gate figures prominently in the prophetic word. Now we might wonder why a closed gate would have any prophetic significance. Well, when Jesus would come over the Mount of Olives down through the Kidron Valley, and he would go through the Eastern Gate into the Temple Mount, because that was the nearest route. There was no reason why he would go through any other gate. We read in Ezekiel 44 that this gate, the Eastern Gate, would be closed and it would not be opened again until the Prince returned. Now, Suleiman the Great built the walls and the gate. The original Eastern Gate was destroyed, and Suleiman the Great, in about 1550, sealed this gate, evidently to keep Christian pilgrims from going through it. And the Jordanian guards have even stationed a sentry on the other side of the gate unless somebody should open that gate. And the Muslims have even put a cemetery in front of the gate because Jesus is our high priest, and no high priest would go through a graveyard. So that gate is to be closed until Jesus returns. It has not been opened, and it will not be opened until he comes again. His feet will stand upon the Mount of Olives. He will again come down through the Kidron Valley. He will enter in the eastern gate into Jerusalem, and he will be declared to be King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Behind me is the tomb of Absalom, located in the Kidron Valley. And Josephus noted that this memorial here was in the memory of Absalom, David's troublesome son. We know David was a great man and a great king. He was a great man of God, but he often neglected his family probably, and he had trouble with some of his own children, including Absalom.
This very strange monument is a pillar of Absalom. I'm standing in the Kidron Valley. Not far from here, Yeshua walked across to the Garden of Gethsemane and prayed. And there's a lot of things that took place in this valley. In fact, when King David was running from Absalom, they crossed the Kidron Valley. Now this monument is a strange monument. It must weigh 500 tons. One wonders how it got here. Was it carved out of the rocks, or was it brought here somehow like the Egyptians carried the giant obelisks and stones? We don't know for sure, but one thing we do know is that Absalom, though to many is an obscure man in Jewish history, he certainly was a prominent figure as a foreshadowing of the Antichrist.
We're now at the Garden of Gethsemane. Records indicate that this was a garden at the time of Jesus Christ and has been a continuing place of rest ever since that time. Jesus would come over the Mount of Olives, go into the city, and on his way out, he would stop in the Garden of Gethsemane to rest, because travelers would usually do that before they would make the hard climb up the Mount of Olives. And on the night that he was arrested, he would come from the house of Caiaphas, come up the Kidron Valley, stop in the Garden of Gethsemane in preparation to go back over the Mount of Olives. And it was here that he was arrested. He was betrayed by Judas with a kiss. And before that, we read that he went about a stone's throw and prayed great drops of blood. The church behind us here, the Church of All Nations, has a stone in it, which would be about a stone's throw from this spot. So it is said that that is where Jesus prayed, although this is tradition, no actual historical or biblical facts to support it. But this is an important site. We see the huge olive trees here. Some of them are hundreds of years old. And olive trees never dies. It always comes up from the root. Some of these trees here could have been here when Jesus wept here in the Garden of Gethsemane. In our travels through the Holy Land, we find ourselves on the western side of the Mount of Olives, about halfway down the mountain, in a Jewish graveyard which covers most of the western side of the mountain. Most Jews want to be buried here because when the Messiah stands on the top of the mountain and the dead raise, they want to be the first in the resurrection, and that's why they desire to be buried here. The Chapel of the Tears, which is just across the road here from where we're standing on the Mount of Olives, is a Catholic shrine and church built by the Catholic Church to commemorate the place where Jesus delivered his lament over Jerusalem. It is also thought to be the place where he also delivered the Olivet Discourse about what would happen to Jerusalem and things that would occur before he came again. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how oft would I gather you under my wings as a hen gathereth her chicks, but you would not. I say therefore, you will not see me again until you will say, Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. This is the approximate location on the Mount of Olives where Jesus mentioned or quoted this sorrowful lament. He understood that, as Jeremiah has prophesied, that Israel did not know the time of her visitation, and Israel had rejected him as their Messiah. Therefore, he looked forward to his coming death, burial, and resurrection, and his coming again. Even today, Israel has not said of Jesus Christ, "Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord," but we know they will during the last half of the tribulation. And as we read in Romans 11, the deliverer will roar out of Zion, and all Israel shall be saved.
This is the traditional site of the Ascension of Christ, one of the most exciting places in all Israel. The disciples stood around the Lord, and as they were talking to him, he bodily ascended into heaven. And the angel said to them, "Why do you look at him as though he's gone into heaven? He's going to come back the same way he left, right here, this spot. When he comes, Mount of Olivet will cleave in half. He'll walk down into the holy city through the Golden Gate, and the Messianic kingdom will be on." And this is where we end our Holy Land tour, right here at the Mount of Ascension. We hope you've enjoyed this fabulous trip. And so for Noah Hutchins and myself, I'm Ken Klein. Maranatha.